Lady Bexley shut her carriage door before Margaret Pembroke's last character letter hit the cobblestones. The paper slid beneath the wheel, white against the wet stones of the Mayfair Mews, and two ladies by the iron railings lifted their fans as if Margaret were indecent. Across the narrow lane, in a townhouse London had called dead for 6 years, a latch turned. Cornelius, Duke of Fairholme, opened his door with a candle in one hand, and his other hand held out toward the woman every respectable house had just refused. He did not smile. He did not ask what had happened. He merely stood in the yellow spill of light, severe and black, while the Bexley carriage waited behind him like a judge. Lady Lydia Bexley leaned from the carriage window. Her silk sleeve brushed the painted door. Her voice was soft enough to be polite and sharp enough to cut. "No more doors, Miss Pembroke. You understand me. No respectable house in London will employ a governess who corrects her betters." Margaret bent, picked up the muddied letter, and folded it once. Her fingers did not tremble until she hid them around the handle of her cloth bundle. Inside that bundle lay 2 gowns, 4 shillings, and the mended, bone-handled pen she had used to write every honest application. Tucked beside it was a paper Lady Bexley had once ordered her to copy and sign. Margaret had refused then. She refused now. "I spoke the truth, my lady," she said. The older woman beside Lady Bexley gave a breathless laugh. The gentleman looked away. "The truth," Lady Bexley said, "is whatever the master of the house decides it is." The carriage door snapped shut. The wheels turned. Mud spattered the hem of Margaret's plain gown. Then the candle across the mews lifted. The Duke of Fairholme's face was half in shadow. His townhouse had been shuttered since his duchess died. The brass knocker was tarnished. The curtains were drawn at every window. No music came from it. No guests. No laughter. Servants in other houses crossed themselves when they passed the door at night and called it Fairholme's silent house. Cornelius looked once at the departing carriage. Then he looked at Margaret. "Miss Pembroke," he said. It was not comfort. It was summons. Margaret looked at the 2 witnesses by the railings. They were waiting to see whether she would crawl, plead, or weep. She did none of those things. She crossed the cobblestones with her bundle in both hands and stopped at the open door. "Your Grace," she said. He moved aside. The first door in London to open for her did not feel like salvation. It felt like stepping into a sealed room where grief itself had learned to breathe. A footman took her cloak in silence. Another servant closed the door without a sound. Heavy cloth covered the mirrors. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked, but the chime had been muffled. Cornelius led her into a study lined with books no hand seemed to have touched in years. The housekeeper, Mrs. Parks, remained at the open door, her face composed, and her eyes kind enough to be dangerous. Kindness could undo a woman faster than insult. The Duke placed the candle upon his desk. Beside it lay one of Margaret's returned letters, opened and smoothed flat. "You read my character," Margaret said. "I did," Cornelius replied. His voice was low, exact, and cold. "Lady Bexley sent it to my steward as a warning." Margaret's throat tightened. She would not ask whether he believed it. Asking would be another door. He pushed a sheet of paper across the desk. "Temporary governess and reader at Fairholme Hall. The estate school is to open at Michaelmas for the tenant children. Your wages will be paid directly to you. Mrs. Parks will accompany you to the hall, and you will answer to no one but my steward in practical matters, and to me in matters of the school." Margaret looked at the contract. A proper contract. Not charity wrapped in velvet. Not protection that became possession. "You know what Lady Bexley says I did," she said. "I know what you wrote." His gloved finger tapped the returned letter. "I will not call cruelty Discipline. The sentence seemed louder here than in Lady Bexley's nursery. Margaret lifted her chin. Her nephew was locked in a coal room for spilling tea. When the magistrate asked questions, Lady Bexley told me to blame a scullery maid. I would not. Cornelius studied her. Most gentlemen looked at a governess as they looked at a chair, useful if quiet, inconvenient if noticed. The Duke looked as if every word had weight, and he was measuring it, not dismissing it. Most women in your position would have apologized, he said. Most women in my position are hungry enough to be forgiven for anything. And you, I am hungry, Margaret said, but not enough to lie about a child. The housekeeper's hand tightened on the doorframe. Cornelius's expression changed only at the jaw. This is not charity, Miss Pembroke. This is work. I require a woman who does not traffic in flattering lies. In return, I require obedience to one rule. Margaret waited. No raised voices in my house, he said. No music, no unnecessary noise, no questioning of closed rooms. A strange answer moved through her, bitter and familiar. I can abide by silence, Your Grace. I am well practiced in not being heard. His eyes flickered, only once. Then he handed her the quill. Margaret signed with her own mended pen. Its bone handle was cracked near the grip and bound with thread, but the line it made was black and clean. By the end of the week, she was in the Cotswolds. Fairholme Hall rose from the mist like a fortress that had forgotten it was built for living. The servants spoke in whispers. The clocks had felt tucked into their bells. The pianoforte in the west wing wore a linen shroud. The schoolroom smelled of dust, chalk, and abandoned childhood. Margaret unpacked her bundle, counted her 4 shillings, and placed the bone-handled pen in the middle of the schoolroom desk. There, at least, it looked like a flag. On her 3rd morning, she found Cornelius standing in the doorway. He did not knock. Dukes seldom knocked. But he did not enter either. Margaret was writing out copy lines for the tenant children. The scratch of her pen against the paper was the only sharp sound in the wing. She finished the sentence before she rose. The inkstand has been filled, Your Grace. I thank you. His gaze moved to the pen. It is a broken thing. So am I, according to London. I did not ask London. The answer should not have warmed her. It did. My steward can provide a silver pen, he said. This one writes the truth just as well. Something almost like approval passed over his face, and vanished before it could become kindness. The next morning, Margaret found a small penknife beside the inkstand, and a packet of good paper, not the thin scraps she had expected for charity pupils. No note, no praise. He had not replaced her pen. He had given her the means to keep writing. The estate children arrived on Monday. There were 8 of them, not 6, as the steward had promised. 2 girls from the dairy clutched each other's hands. Little Thomas Arkwright stared at the portraits, as if the dead dukes might climb down and punish him for breathing. Margaret let them choose their benches. She carried no cane. She wrote the alphabet on the board and turned so they could see her face. We will begin with names, she said. A person who can write his name is harder to steal from. The children looked at her in wonder. That was not how village children were usually taught. When Thomas misread the first word and flinched, Margaret felt a sharp, private fury. Not against the boy, against every adult who had taught him to expect pain before correction. She tapped the page lightly. Look again. Thomas swallowed. Will you not strike me, miss? No. The last master said noise was wicked. Marg greatest beside bench. Her plain gown brushed the boards. Silence is not the same as goodness. Fear does not help you read. It only makes you guess. Try again." From the corridor came no sound at all. She knew without turning that Cornelius was there. Thomas tried again. This time he found the word. At dusk, a footman brought 3 thick candles to the schoolroom. His Grace observed, "The light fails early here, Miss Pembroke." Margaret touched one candle with 2 fingers. Good wax, not tallow, not the scraps given to servants when the family had finished with brightness. "He observed?" she asked. The footman's eyes flicked toward the corridor. "His Grace observes a great deal, miss." That night, Margaret wrote until the candle burned low. By morning, a small stool had appeared near Thomas's bench, so she would not have to kneel on the hard floor. Again, no note. The silent house was learning to answer without speaking. For a fortnight, lessons settled into rhythm. The children's voices began as whispers and grew into cautious sound. A giggle escaped when the dairy girls discovered that the word goose looked as foolish on paper as the bird did in the yard. The giggle died when Cornelius passed the door. Margaret saw the children stiffen. She saw the Duke see it too. He stopped at the threshold. The old habit moved across his face. Silence first. Control first. The house must not be disturbed. Then he looked at Thomas, who was hiding a grin behind his slate. "What was amusing?" Cornelius asked. Thomas turned white. Margaret's own breath caught. She could not correct a duke in front of children, not directly, not without confirming every accusation Lady Bexley had made. So she lifted the slate from Thomas's hands and held it out. "We have discovered, Your Grace, that geese are badly served by spelling." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Cornelius looked at the slate, at the word, at Thomas's terrified face. "A defect in the language," he said gravely, "not in the student." The children stared. Margaret lowered her eyes before anyone could see the sudden brightness in them. It was a small thing, a ridiculous thing, but the Duke of Fairholme had allowed a laugh to live. The first true fracture in him came during a storm. Rain swept over the Cotswolds with such violence that the windows rattled in their frames. Margaret had gone searching for chalk in the west corridor because the steward's boy swore there was a supply cupboard beyond the linen press. Instead, she found a heavy oak door standing ajar. The music room. She knew it before she saw the shrouded pianoforte and the covered harp. The air smelled of rosin dust and old flowers. A clock sat on the mantel. Its bell had been stuffed with felt. Margaret stepped inside. She meant only to take the clock. The children needed a steady tick to hear the rhythm of verse. She turned and nearly collided with Cornelius. He stood in the doorway, white around the mouth, his hand gripping the frame. The storm seemed to strike through him, not around him. "This room is forbidden," he said. Margaret set the clock carefully on a side table. "The door was open, Your Grace." "I came for a clock. The children require a beat for poetry." "You entered a closed room." "I did." "You might have lied." "I might have," she said, "but then you would have been wrong to hire me." The words hung between them. The storm filled the rest. Cornelius looked past her to the covered pianoforte. His gaze changed. It did not soften. It went inward to a place no one had been permitted to follow. "When I returned from the continent, the war was finished," he said at last. "I came home covered in mud and powder, expecting to find my wife at that instrument. I found black crepe on the door. She had died of fever 3 weeks before." Margaret stood very still. "The servants did not hear my carriage. They were laughing in the kitchen. A clock was chiming in the hall. His breath roughened. The house sounded alive. She was not. I thought every sound was a theft. The Duke of Fairholme looked suddenly like a man who had been standing in that doorway for 6 years. Margaret wanted to offer comfort. She had none that would not insult him. So she offered the truth, because it was the only gift the world had not managed to beat out of her. Keeping a house silent will not keep her alive, Your Grace. His eyes closed. It only teaches the living to apologize for breathing, she said. If she loved this house, she cannot have wished it to become her grave. Cornelius reached into his coat and drew out a folded letter, worn at the creases. He did not hand it to her. He only looked down at it. Her last letter asked me not to make a shrine of Fairholme. The rain lashed the glass. I hid it, he said. I hid it because obedience felt like losing her twice. Margaret looked at the shrouded instrument, then at the man beside the door. In Lady Bexley's world, power was a hand that closed over the weak. Here was power folded around a wound until both had hardened into stone. You have not lost her by allowing children to read aloud, Margaret said. You have only mistaken stillness for loyalty. His hand tightened around the letter. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Cornelius crossed the room, lifted the felt from the mantel clock, and placed it in Margaret's hand. Take it to the schoolroom, he said. She took it. The next morning the children learned poetry to the sound of an unmuffled tick. 2 days later, before dawn, Margaret entered the schoolroom and stopped in the doorway. Cornelius was sitting at her desk, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves stark against the gray light. The Duke of Fairholme was trying to bind a cracked slate frame with twine. He had made a soldier's knot of it, practical, and far too tight. The wood had begun to split. He looked up as if caught in a crime. It was broken. For Thomas, Margaret asked. He pretended it was not. Of course he did. Broken things learn to be useful before they ask to be mended. Cornelius said nothing. Margaret crossed the room and held out her hand. He gave her the slate. Their fingers touched. His hand was warm. That startled her more than it should have. You are tying it too tightly, she said. Wood swells in damp air. It needs room. So do people, he replied. The words were quiet. They entered her like a blade. She looped the twine properly and knotted it. He watched her hands. You mend everything, he said. Pens, slates, children's fears. My house. Margaret almost laughed. It would have hurt too much. I mend what I can because what I cannot mend follows me into sleep. He looked up. The dawn made his gray eyes less cold and more tired. Who mends you, Miss Pembroke? No one had ever asked her that, as if the answer mattered. The careful wall inside her shifted. She looked at the bone-handled pen, at the crack bound in thread, at the ink stains no washing could remove from her thumb. Every house in London preferred Lady Bexley's comfort to my truth, she said. I have stood at so many thresholds with letters in my hand that I began to feel like a question no one wanted answered. Cornelius rose. He did not touch her. He did not draw her into an embrace as a lesser man might have done to make himself feel generous. He stood beside her, close enough that she was no longer alone, far enough that her dignity remained her own. You will not have to be brave in doorways here, he said. Margaret looked at him then. For the first time, Fairholme Hall did not feel like a tomb. It felt like a house, waiting to learn her name. The world outside would not permit that peace to last. The warning came by an ordinary road. A Fairholme groom had been sent back to the London townhouse for school slates, ink powder, and several parcels of books Cornelius had ordered from Bond Street. At the Bell and Crown, 3 streets from the Mews, he had drunk too much ale and spoken too proudly of the new governess his Grace had carried off to the Cotswolds. By supper, the gossip had reached a Bexley footman. By breakfast, it had reached Cassius Sefton. That afternoon, the letter arrived, with a red seal and Lady Bexley's small, vicious hand. Margaret read it by the schoolroom window while the children copied their lines. Cassius Sefton, her late mother's stepbrother, had found an ally in Lady Bexley. They meant to attend the Fairholme parish service on Sunday. Before rector tenants and county families, Lady Bexley would settle Miss Pembroke's character. Cassius would claim Margaret's wages against debts he said her mother had left unpaid. There was no lawful claim. Margaret knew that. But shame moved faster than law. If they spoke in church, the scandal would cling to the school, the children, and the Duke who had opened his door. That night, Margaret packed her bundle. She did it slowly. 2 gowns, chemise, purse, pen, the old paper Lady Bexley had ordered her to sign. She tied the cloth once, then untied it, because the knot looked too final. Outside the schoolroom, the hall clock chimed, 1 clear note, then another. No felt. Margaret sat down on the edge of the narrow bed and covered her mouth with her hand. The sound she made was not a sob. She would not give Lady Bexley even that, though the woman was miles away. At dawn, Thomas Arkwright knocked on her door. He stood in the corridor with his repaired slate clutched to his chest. On it, in careful, crooked letters, he had written, Margaret Pembroke. "I spelled it," he said, "so no one steals it." Margaret stared at the slate until the letters blurred. Then she untied her bundle. Cassius came a day early. The front doors of Fairholme Hall opened without ceremony, and he strode in with mud on his boots, triumph on his face, and a folded memorandum in his gloved hand. He was a narrow man, with restless fingers and the sour confidence of someone who had bullied women in rooms where no one else listened. Margaret was crossing the hall with copybooks in her arms. Mrs. Parks stood near the stairs. 2 footmen turned at once. "There she is," Cassius said. "Pack your bundle, girl." Margaret did not move. "You have no right to enter this house." "I have every right over my sister's daughter." "You were not my mother's brother." "Near enough for debt." He crossed the marble before the footman could block him and seized her arm. The copybooks fell and scattered at their feet. "Lady Bexley will pay what you owe if you return to London and sign a proper confession. A woman who will not be guided must be compelled." Pain flashed up Margaret's arm. She did not cry out. "Release me," she said. Cassius lifted the folded paper in his free hand. "Do not make a noble scene. I have your mother's expenses here. Lodging, physic, burial, mourning linen, every shilling advanced by me and never repaid. If you refuse, I shall place the account before every parish officer from here to London. No respectable employer will keep a woman who hides family obligations." "That paper is not a bond," Margaret said. "It is enough to stain you." "Then it is all you ever wanted from it." His smile sharpened. "There is the insolence." He reached for her sleeve as if to drag her toward the door. "Remove your hand from her." The words came from the staircase. Cornelius descended 1 step at a time. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. But the hall seemed to change around him, as though the very stone remembered who owned it. Cassius loosened his grip, then tightened it again in a last foolish display of authority. Cornelius stopped at the foot of the stairs. "I gave you an instruction, Mr. Sefton." "This is a family matter, Your Grace." "No," Cornelius said. "This is assault in my hall." Cassius held up the memorandum. "It is a debt claim, witnessed and itemized.
I can bring it before the magistrate. I can attach her wages. I can make this very inconvenient for any gentleman who chooses to harbor her." Cornelius looked at the paper as if it were an insect on the floor. "Can you produce her signature?" Cassius's mouth tightened. "Can you produce a bond signed by Miss Pembroke after she came of age? She benefited from the expense. Did she contract it?" Cassius said nothing. Cornelius's voice went colder. "Then you possess an old account and a great deal of impudence." Cassius's grip faltered. Cornelius looked at the nearest footman. "Open the door." The footman obeyed. "If Mr. Sefton touches Miss Pembroke again," Cornelius said, "you will put him outside by the stable gate. If he returns without invitation, you will send for the constable." Cassius dropped Margaret's arm, but not his malice. "You protect a viper. Lady Bexley is already at the inn. On Sunday, the parish will know what sort of woman you employ. You cannot command a church to be silent." "I have no wish to command silence," Cornelius said. "It has done enough harm in my house." Cassius stared, confused by the answer. Cornelius stepped aside, opening a path to the door. "Leave." When the door closed behind him, the hall remained full of the damage he had tried to bring. Copybooks lay across the marble. Margaret's arm throbbed. Mrs. Parks bent to gather the children's pages, her mouth pressed into a hard line. Cornelius came to Margaret, then stopped before he touched her. "May I see your arm?" The question nearly undid her. Not the concern, the permission. She extended her arm. His face darkened when he saw the red mark through the thin sleeve. "I will leave tonight," Margaret said. "No." The old command in him returned, then broke at once. He looked away, mastered himself, and began again. "I cannot command you to stay. If I stay, they will drag your name through mine. My name has survived worse than Lady Bexley's malice. Mine has not." He accepted that, because it was true. "If you go," he said, "they will make your truth into a secret. If you stay, they must answer it aloud." Margaret looked at the closed door. "And if I cannot speak when everyone looks at me, then you will not speak." She turned back, startled. Cornelius's face was grave. "I will not purchase your courage with my protection. The church will hear only what you choose to say. But if you choose to say it, no one will interrupt you." There it was. Not rescue, not command. A door opened, and the choice left in her hand. Sunday morning came bright and cold. The Fairholme Parish Church had not held so many people since the old Duchess's funeral. Tenant farmers filled the back pews. Village mothers sat with children scrubbed pink and restless beside them. County families who had not crossed the Fairholme threshold in years arrived early enough to be seen arriving. Margaret sat in the second pew in her plainest gown. Her bundle was not with her. The bone-handled pen was in her pocket. Lady Bexley's old false statement rested beneath her gloves. Across the aisle, Lady Bexley sat in plum silk, her bonnet tied beneath her chin like armor. Cassius sat beside her with his hands folded piously over his waistcoat. Cornelius sat in the Fairholme mourning pew, the dark curtains drawn back for the first time in 6 years. Reverend Westbrook had barely finished the opening prayer when Lady Bexley rose. "Before we proceed in the eyes of God," she said, her voice carrying beautifully, "this parish must be warned. His Grace's charity has been imposed upon by a woman unfit for any decent house." A murmur moved through the pews. Margaret felt it travel over her skin. "Miss Pembroke was dismissed from my household for impertinence," Lady Bexley continued.
She is a corrupting influence upon children. She sets servants against their betters. She hides debts and disobedience behind pious language. Cassius stood as if called by righteousness itself. She owes her wages against family obligations. She is practically my ward. There it was, the door closing. Not wood this time, but faces. For one breath, Margaret was back in the Mayfair mews, with mud on her hem and fans lifted against her. Her fingers found the pen in her pocket. Wood scraped against stone. Cornelius stepped out of the mourning pew. The church fell silent so sharply that Margaret could hear a child's quick breathing in the row behind her. "This is my parish, Lady Bexley," Cornelius said. His voice carried to the rafters without effort. "Any charge against Miss Pembroke will be spoken plainly before the rector and the people you have chosen as witnesses. There will be no whispers today." Lady Bexley's smile thinned. "Your Grace, you cannot expect a lady to repeat every unpleasant particular. I expect truth from anyone who invokes God to ruin a woman." A stir went through the church. Lady Bexley reddened. Cornelius turned to Margaret. He did not speak for her. He did not beckon as though she were a child. He simply stepped aside. The aisle lay open. Margaret stood. Her knees felt hollow, but her back remained straight. She walked into the aisle, past the villagers, past Cassius's smug little smile, until she stood before Lady Bexley. "I was dismissed from your house," Margaret said, "because I refused to sign a lie." Lady Bexley gave a soft laugh. What melodrama. Margaret drew the folded paper from beneath her glove. The laugh stopped. "This is the statement you wrote for me to copy." Margaret unfolded it. The paper shook once. She stilled it. "It says your scullery maid locked Master Julian in the coal room and struck him when he cried. It says I witnessed the maid's cruelty. It says I advised you to dismiss her." The rector's face changed. Margaret looked at the congregation. None of that was true. Master Julian was locked in the coal room after he spilled tea on the turkey carpet. The maid was in the laundry yard at the time. I saw the child brought out, with coal dust on his face and bruises on his arms. When the magistrate asked questions, Lady Bexley ordered me to copy this paper and sign it. Lady Bexley rose fully now. "A forged scrap. It is in your hand," Margaret said. The church breathed in. "You may deny it," Margaret continued, her voice gaining steadiness with each word. "You may call me insolent. You may close every door in London. But if you deny this paper, you must produce the maid you dismissed and the child you punished. You must answer why you sent warnings to every house that considered employing me. You must explain why the sentence you hated most was this: I will not call cruelty. Discipline." No one moved. Lady Bexley's fan snapped shut. For the first time since Margaret had known her, the Countess had no servant close enough to blame. Cassius lunged into the silence. "Whatever foolishness occurred in Lady Bexley's nursery has no bearing on the debt. The girl's wages are mine, by family right." Margaret turned toward him. "No," she said. It was a small word. It carried further than his accusation. She faced the rector. "Reverend Westbrook, am I 24? You are, Miss Pembroke. Is there any bond recorded in this parish, or any parish known to you, by which I pledged my wages to Mr. Sefton?" The rector looked toward Cassius. "No such bond has been presented." Cassius thrust up his memorandum. "Her mother's expenses are not Miss Pembroke's contract," the rector said. Margaret did not look away from Cassius. "And does a woman of full age have the right to contract her own employment?" "She does." Margaret took the bone-handled pen from her pocket. "Then I will answer Mr. Sefton with ink, not fear."
Cornelia stepped forward. "The Fairholme Parish School requires a mistress. I appoint Miss Margaret Pembroke to that office, with salary paid directly to her person, subject to her acceptance and the rector's witness." All eyes turned to Margaret. There was the old danger. To accept would be to stand where everyone could see her. To refuse would be to move from door to door with a bundle. Thomas Arkwright peered from behind his mother's shawl. His repaired slate was tucked under his arm. Margaret walked to the vestry book. The church watched. She dipped her pen and signed her name in the parish record, with the same hand Lady Bexley had tried to make into a tool of falsehood. Margaret Pembroke. Not ward, not viper, not charity, not scandal. Schoolmistress. Cassius made a strangled sound. Lady Bexley turned so pale that the rouge on her cheeks looked painted on porcelain. No one moved to comfort her. The rector closed the book. "The appointment is witnessed." For a moment the silence in the church was complete. Then Thomas, who was too young to understand terror and old enough to understand justice, "Miss spelled it right." A ripple passed through the pews. Not laughter exactly. Release. The sound of people recognizing that the great lady had not won. Lady Bexley swept toward the door. This time no one opened it quickly enough. She had to wait while the verger fumbled with the latch. Margaret watched her go. Cornelius stood beside Margaret, not before her. The difference mattered. He had used his name to open the floor, but the truth that filled it was hers. When she looked up, his eyes were no longer ice. They were bright with something disciplined and fierce. The school opened the next week. Parents came warily. Then the miller's daughter read a psalm without stumbling. Thomas wrote his name without help. And the dairy girls began keeping accounts for eggs. Sound returned by degrees. The hall clock chimed at noon. Mrs. Parks ordered the drawing-room curtains washed. A gardener whistled near the roses, froze, then continued when no reprimand came. Cornelius did not become easy. He was still formal, still precise, still capable of silencing a careless steward with one look. But he no longer required the house to mourn on his behalf. One evening, 6 weeks after the church service, Margaret found him in the music room. The linen covers had been removed. The pianoforte stood polished. On the mantel, the clock ticked plainly. Cornelius held his wife's last letter. Beside it on the pianoforte lay Margaret's bone-handled pen. "I borrowed it," he said. "I noticed." He looked almost guilty. "I have written to Lady Bexley's cousin, who sits among the governors of a charity school in Lambeth. The dismissed maid is to be found and given a place if she wants one. Master Julian's uncle has been informed of the facts." Margaret touched the edge of the pianoforte. "You did not tell me." "I wished to bring you the answer, not the burden." That was a dangerous kind of tenderness. She looked at the letter in his hand. "And that? I read it aloud this morning." "To whom?" "No one." His mouth tightened. "To the room." Margaret understood. Some griefs did not need an audience. They needed air. Cornelius placed his wife's letter on the mantel, not hidden in his coat. Then he turned to Margaret. "I opened a door to you because your sentence offended every coward in London," he said. "I thought I was hiring honesty. I did not know I was inviting life back into my house." Margaret's fingers closed around the edge of the instrument. She could face Lady Bexley before a church, but this quiet room frightened her more. "Your Grace, Cornelius," he said. She breathed once. Cornelius. The name changed the air.
He came no closer than propriety allowed. The door stood open behind them. Mrs. Parks was down the corridor, humming badly and pretending not to. "I will not ask you to stay because I sheltered you," Cornelius said. "I will not ask because London wronged you, or because the children love you, or because Fairholme needs you. Need is a poor foundation for honor." Margaret could not look away. "I ask because I love you," he said, "because you tell the truth without cruelty, because you understand silence and still choose speech, because when every door closed against you, you crossed mine without surrendering yourself." The words struck the very place in her that had been waiting at thresholds for years. He opened his hand. In his palm lay her mended pen. "If you leave, this house will not close against you. If you stay, it must be by choice. Margaret Pembroke, will you become my wife?" For one heartbeat, the old fear rose. A governess did not become a duchess without being examined, measured, mocked. Lady Bexley would not be the last woman to call her unfit. The world would find new doors to close. Margaret looked at the pen in his palm and did not take it. "If I marry you," she said, "London will say you were bewitched by gratitude. They will say I climbed through your grief to reach your name." Cornelius's hand remained steady. "Then London will be wrong." "London is often wrong. It is rarely quiet." "No," he said, "but I have done enough worshipping silence." Her throat tightened. "They will make your house pay for me," she said. "They will speak of Lady Bexley's accusations long after the truth has bored them. They will look at every child in my school and say charity has become ambition. They will call me the governess who trapped a duke." Cornelius stepped closer, then stopped before closeness could become pressure. "They may call you what they like," he said. "I will answer with my name, my door, and my presence beside you. Not before you, beside you. And if there is any day you wish to wait, we wait. If there is any room you do not wish to enter, we do not enter it. I am asking for your hand, Margaret, not your surrender." The clock on the mantel chimed. Clear, unashamed. Margaret took the pen from his hand and laid it on the pianoforte between them. "I will not be made into an ornament for your redemption," she said. A faint warmth moved through his face. "No." "I will continue the school. Yes, I will speak when something is wrong, even if it is inconvenient." "I am counting on it." "And no room in this house will be closed, because grief is easier than courage." Cornelius looked at his wife's letter on the mantel, then back at her. "No room," he said. Margaret placed her hand in his. "Then yes." He did not seize her. He bowed over her hand as if it were a vow already written. His lips touched her gloved fingers once, with such restraint that it felt more intimate than any embrace. Months later, Fairholme Hall stood with its windows open. Children's voices drifted from the east wing, reciting poetry to the tick of an unmuffled clock. In the west wing, a village girl practiced scales on the pianoforte, while Mrs. Parks pretended the wrong notes did not pain her. The servants walked in ordinary shoes again. The mirrors had been uncovered. The house had remembered its face. Margaret stood on the front steps in the morning sun, a basket of copybooks on her arm and ink on one finger. She wore no bundle. She waited at no service entrance. A carriage turned into the drive. One of the county ladies leaned out, eager for a glimpse of the governess who had become Duchess of Fairholme and not disappeared into silk. Margaret felt the old scrutiny touch her, then fall away. Behind her,
The great oak door opened. Cornelius stood there, not with a candle this time, but with the bone-handled pen in his hand. "You left this in the schoolroom," he said. "I meant to."
His eyes warmed. She took the pen, then took his offered hand. Together they stepped back over the threshold, not into silence, but into the living noise of the house that had chosen her.